What do you know? I'm on time for a change. It makes a change, doesn't it? Hello, friends. Hello, Patriots. I pressed the button, and what do you know? It all started again. This thing of ours, it starts 8 p.m. GMT. Delighted you could join me. The house is full. The room is filling up. My guest is in the green room. She's staying away from the bolly. It's all on lockdown. We've got crates and crates of it back there for some reason. I don't think we might have overstocked. Maybe someone will come along and they might dip in. Great to see the councillor, Herbert Ryan Hoax 2020. Michael John Dennis, our friend, great to see you every day. Thank you very much for your support. Johnny Mack gives us a 5x5 in the live chat. James Collins, the one and only. I did have another T-shirt design. It's just gone up on the website, and I haven't effectively mirrored James's T-shirt, but it's essentially the same. Links in the description how you can buy and purchase one of them for T-shirts in the link. Now, before I won't go into all the usual tribe, and I will bring my guest in tonight. I think you're going to find tonight's discussion absolutely scintillating. Tonight's disquisition will be on all things currently afflicting our situation. But before I get started, the one I must do, give our due props out to our longtime supporters and true friends of the show, the little farmer.ie. We love our enzymes so much. We keep them alive. Wheatgrass and barley grass, mighty shot. Small wonder they're so good. One wheatgrass shot is equivalent to 1 kilogram of your daily green veg. Barley grass juice is full of antioxidants. Just shake and shoot. Why not enter in the promo code GT into the code and you'll be given a very suitable discount at very favorable rates. But I tell you, I use it myself every day and I really recommend it. Shameless split of self-promotion there, but the supporters there with us. Susie Kiltard, Liam Kelly, Jane Murray, the one and only Jane Murray. I'm sure you're tuned up for today. So tonight's guest, without further ado, I do have some articles to bring in. We're not going to touch on articles. I meant some graphs. But tonight I'm delighted to be joined by a member, shall I say, of Health Freedom Ireland. And we are going to go through it all. But let me bring in Kelly straight off the bat. Kelly, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Well, thank you. And you?
I'm brilliant. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for agreeing to sit down with the Grand Torino and for discussing on these topics. I know you have a great presentation for us and a run of train of thought that you're going to bring us through. I'm looking very much forward to it. If you could, a brief outline of yourself, how you came to be in this situation, and why you think it's time now for people like yourself to start speaking up and start questioning the narrative.
Okay, so I am a homeopath, and a nutritional therapist, and an author, and a mother. Most important, a mother. And where I started looking into things was when two of my three children in the 1990s, so they were born then, were injured by vaccines. So I gave vaccines. They became injured, and then I started to look at things and ask questions and things like that. So,
Kelly, if you're still there, if you can still hear me, we've lost the signal a little bit. We'll give it a chance. We'll give it a second. Wait and see. This is always happening. Kelly, are you still with me?
Yeah.
My apologies there. That comes in. Carry on. Sorry, just a brief breakup in the signal. Go ahead.
I had three children. They were born in the 1990s. Two were vaccine injured. So when my middle daughter was injured, I had already asked questions about vaccines. My doctor, who was a friend of mine, told me what he believed, and he believed that they were the way to go. And because it was the 1990s, we didn't have the internet. I couldn't ask questions of people and things like that, or find information easily. So I gave them against my better judgment. And my middle child, I can look back and see that she was actually having reactions the whole time, but I didn't see it. I questioned after 2 because her demeanor and everything changed, but at 4, within a week after a vaccine, she just changed and life went to hell in a handcart. So that's when I really started to look into it. And she no longer had any social, she could talk, but she couldn't read any social cues. So she could no longer interpret people's reactions, what their facial reactions, what their body language meant, having been able to before that. And so she was no longer happy to be without me because I was her sounding board. And then my youngest developed type 1 diabetes. There's no history of that at all in our families. And it is listed as an adverse effect on one of the MMR vaccines. So that's where my journey started. I then wrote a book about it, What If I Harmed My Children, which is on Amazon. And it will explain, if people want to know more about that, it explains right from the beginning, where I got married, had the children, and then asked the questions, and the research I found. It's scientifically referenced as well, so people can look up the references I found along the way. But mainly it's a story. And I wrote it because it wasn't possible to tell everybody what our lives were like with vaccine injury, and how it affected so radically the whole family, and how nobody actually believed you. And because it's denied here in Ireland and nobody recognizes vaccine injury, they actually most of the time will tell parents, and mostly the mother, that it's all in their mind, or they're spoiling the child, or it's all their fault for some reason. So it was so that people could see what it was like to live with vaccine injury, but it's also anybody who's living with a medically challenged child. So then I qualified as a homeopath in 2004 because I had seen it work with my children in acutes. And it's used by 200 people worldwide as a form of medicine. And so I wanted to see, could I do something more natural with the children, is why I started it. And I really enjoyed it. So now I started to practice it as well. And I used it to help my middle child, who I never thought would be independent, regain most of her social skills. Nobody would know that she has them, any challenges, but she does still have some challenges. But that she's independent now, and it's great. Brilliant. It's wonderful. So homeopathy is actually a safe and effective medicine system that we've actually used in Ireland since the 1790s, but I never knew that growing up. It's also currently being used, which is very relevant to our current situation, in India and Cuba as a prophylactic measure against SARS-CoV-2, which is causing the coronavirus, the COVID-19 issue. And it's written about in the British Medical Journal. You can see how Cuba's used it before in epidemics and things like that. And actually, back at the beginning of the lockdown, the Irish Society of Homeopaths wrote to all the elected members in our government and made sure that they were aware of the effectiveness of homeopathy, and that it is there as a prophylactic, and that other countries were using it. And they offered the help of all the registered homeopaths in Ireland to help with this situation. But unfortunately, they haven't heard back. Right. So where I'm coming from then is I firmly believe everybody has a choice in what they do with their health. So I still actually believe that it's their choice if they want to give a vaccine or not. I just believe that they don't have all the information to hand to make an informed choice. And so therefore most people aren't. So I want to give people as much information as possible. And that's where I then joined Health Freedom Ireland, which is a highly diverse group of people with a common concern about keeping choice available when it comes to anything that is medical. So the aims of Health Freedom Ireland would be to empower people with information so that they can make factual information, factual evidence, scientific-based and reviewed information on vaccines. And it's also, its aim is to safeguard the rights of Irish people to bodily autonomy and medical freedom, specifically when it comes to vaccines, but not just that. We're now concerned about the masks, for instance. So we'd like them to have that freedom to choose based on scientific evidence, without fear of ramifications or consequences from the state, from health authorities, educational establishments, or employers. So then, personally, what I would have currently concerns about, I have current concerns about the situation here in Ireland and worldwide, because it's the same pretty much everywhere. Yeah. Well, except Sweden, of course. But I have governments, including our own, are using a metaphor of war to justify what they're doing, to justify the shutting down of entire sections of society. So this war mentality is used to lead the public into a self-sacrificing mode of thinking when it comes to this coronavirus. So the media is then driving it, And what we're seeing now is a lot of collateral damage, as in we're losing human rights, we're losing civil liberties. We're not seeing the science from the governments to justify what the reactions they're taking. And a lot of the science that we are finding is saying totally the opposite to what's being done for the restrictions. We're also, medical ethics is also becoming collateral damage and informed consent, because we're having masks mandated on us, but they weren't mandated in the beginning, and now they are, without any change in the science. The science is still the same. And the World Health Organization said don't use them in the beginning, but now it's changed. But we haven't been shown what the government based that decision on. It appears that we've been hearing that even though there are exemptions to the regulations that have been brought in, that you should be able to apply for to not wear a mask should you have a medical reason for it. What we're hearing is that doctors are actually being told not to give those medical exemptions. So that's really concerning, to put them in place and then tell for the doctors to not be able to give them. So,
sorry, Kelly, do you think doctors, obviously, they would fear their practicing license should they go against the government and stuff like that? It's kind of it's held over them as a kind of a ransom note. Do this, or you're going to pull your license.
Yes, exactly. So, they're in a hard place. However, morally, it's not right to leave people without that when the exemption is there. But equally, it's not morally correct for them to be under the pressure not to do it when it's legally available. So I would have concerns about where we're heading with this, because we're hearing a lot about a vaccine for COVID-19. We're hearing a lot about mandating it. And I have concerns over vaccines in general. They would be that there's an assumption that vaccines are safe and effective, but we aren't seeing the evidence for that. There's no discussion about that. If you want to discuss that or anything else, there's no open discussion. You're being shut down. So questions I would have currently at the moment is, there's discussion that AstraZeneca, for instance, has said that they've sought indemnity from several governments for this new vaccine that they're going to produce. Now, for your viewers, what indemnity means is that if anything goes wrong with this vaccine, if down the line 4 years, 1 month, whenever, if you have an adverse effect on your health, be that Guillain-Barré syndrome in the beginning, which will cause paralysis, or side effects range from the very mild to death. So you won't have any comeback. You won't be able to sue the manufacturer, basically. So the government needs to say, is it giving indemnity for this proposed vaccine? But also, I would be really curious as to whether they've given indemnity for childhood vaccines, because that's something that I can't find out anywhere. And we know that they gave indemnity to the swine flu vaccine in 2009, because we've had a recent case of Aoife Bennett who was harmed by that vaccine. She developed narcolepsy, and the government recently settled that case out of court and paid all the costs, everything that went with it, because they had actually given GlaxoSmithKline an indemnity before they gave that vaccine. So the taxpayer paid millions of euros for that. So I would like to know, are they going to do that for any new vaccines? And actually, have they done it in the past for all the childhood schedule? So the other thing is that what people may not understand is that vaccines are not held to the same rigorous tests as the rest of drugs, because they're deemed as a biological drug and a necessity. So they don't have as high safety tests to go through.
I understand.
So, for instance, if you bring out a new vaccine, it isn't trialed against a placebo being an inert substance that causes no effect within the body. It is now trialed against a comparator. So a comparator is either a previous vaccine or the vaccine you're trialing. You take out the virus or bacteria element to it, and you just use the other excipients or the other ingredients in the vaccine. So what this means is that you can't actually see all the effects of the new vaccine, because your comparator also causes effects. So any of the effects that the comparator causes won't show, they will stop them being showing up in the new one because they will be disregarded. Because, so if, I don't know, 6 people were to get, say, a reaction on the new vaccine and 5 get it on the comparator, then it's not deemed important because it was there in both groups.
I see.
And that's really important. You know, that isn't a true test at all. So a biological drug is something that's produced using a living, or produced from a living organism, or it also contains part of a living organism, which a lot of people don't realize that that's what's in vaccines. And these living organisms have the ability to modify or change the manner in which a body cell operates or responds. So we're altering what we're doing, what our body's doing. And it's aiming to produce one response, but just because it's aiming to produce one response does not mean it's not producing a whole load of others. It is. And so side effects, we've always been led to believe that side effects are minimal because they're side effects, but they aren't. They can be just as huge as the effect you're aiming for, and they can be worse sometimes.
I want to just give an example there. I was just, while you were speaking there, I was trying to dig out a video that I spoke of there in the United States in relation to the vaccine trials. And one of the representatives that was there, I presume he was a doctor, but I presume he would have been of the professional class. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been asked to speak at the committee meeting. But he was speaking on the effects of the aluminium, the nanotechnology that they have with that, but also the aluminium floating through the bloodstream and being able to get into the brain. That it normally, but this nano aluminium that's used, and I see the list, we have a list here of all the vaccines, and it's a main constituent, as they say, a subject, an adjuvant constituent part that they use in the vaccines. And it was never discussed before that, and never understood that the aluminium now can and has been seen to enter the brain. Could be a leading cause for autism, Asperger's, ADHD, and then Alzheimer's as you get to a later stage, or continued exposure. This is breaking information because the question was never asked, it seems. Now, again, you've got your adjuvant parts, your constituent parts as well, and they have led to you. It's, as you say, it's the collateral damage from the secondary causes. They were trying to fix this, as it said, that aluminium would to bind onto the virus once it's produced by the cell or whatever, and able to, the body would then purge it out through its immune system. But the question was never even asked to the side effects after. Would it get into the brain? So this indemnity thing is huge, because this warp speed vaccine that they're going to roll out to us now won't be going through animal testing. It won't be going through the usual 4 to 5 to 10 year processes before it even reaches market level. This is going to be straight out off the bat. And then in 2 years' time, we'll get back to you with any side effects or any results. Oh, by the way, you can't sue us no matter what happens to you.
Yes. When vaccines were first made, adjuvants and the other ingredients in the vaccines, they were never studied for their individual effect on the human that was taking them, nor on their synergistic, their combined effect on people. That's only really been started in the last sort of 10 or so years. So if you were to put up the first slide there, and we can look at that. Okay, so what people can see there is what's in some of the vaccines. And this is just a list. It's on the Center for Disease Control, which is in America. And you can look up this list. Everybody can look up this list for themselves. So if you were to notice that under some of the vaccines, say the DTaP, which would be diphtheria, tetanus, and acellular pertussis vaccine, you can see that there's polysorbate 80 listed there. Now, there's also aluminium listed in them. So like you were saying, aluminium is an adjuvant. So it's there to cause or excite a response in the body to what you're injecting, because what you're injecting has been modified not to cause such an effect. So you need to create a response from the body. So that's what your adjuvant is doing. It's creating a response. However, what the adjuvant also does is it binds with your virus or bacteria, whatever happens to be in this case, the bacteria in the vaccine. Now, your polysorbate 80 also combined, well, it doesn't bind, it crosses the blood-brain barrier. So what it's doing is it's taking the adjuvant, the aluminium, across the blood-brain barrier, and with it goes your bacteria, or in other cases, virus. So it can cross now your blood-brain barrier because of the polysorbate 80. So they didn't know this when they first started doing the vaccines. The polysorbate 80 was in there to spread everything evenly out. It works, it's a surfactant, so it works like your washing up liquid, which dispels the grease all throughout the water rather than in clumps. So, you know, you have different ingredients there. You also have bovine serum. So you have, there's lots of things that weren't ever meant to be injected into the body. There's a difference between ingestion and injection. So if you ingest something and eat it, your body, it's meeting 80% of your immune cells, roughly, your immune response. So it's also still external. Your whole tract is external. So it has to cross out of it to get into the rest of the body. Whereas if you inject something, it's straight into the rest of the body and traveling around. So aluminium ingested is excreted quite heavily, but once it's injected, it's not, we're now finding. So before that, when they first started, they made an assumption that it would be the same as ingesting it, which it's not. It's now we're knowing it's carried around the body and crosses into the brain. And Professor Chris Exley is a really good person for people to go and look up if they want to know more about aluminium. So if we were to go to slide 2, you can see there under the MMR, the first one you have something called WI38, human diploid lung fibroblasts, and under the second one you have MRC5 cells, including DNA and protein. So these are actually cells that were harvested from live aborted fetuses. And
dear God.
People don't realize that, you know, you can't actually harvest cells from dead people or dead beings. It's not possible because they're dead, they won't have a function. They have to be live to be able to do anything with. So
I see that there, sorry, Kelly, just at the very first one there, just so that our viewers can see it. The very first one in the MMR, this human diploid lung fibroblast, as you say, is that a human constituent, or is that how it's labeled? WI38.
yes.
I also played a link from another lady that was speaking at another sitting, obviously with some other government, but she spoke and the various baby parts had been labeled, ID'd as tagged, but they were parts of the liver from a fetus, an aborted fetus. She also gave the fetus the name that the parents had given to it. Also, some of the reasons why the parents were aborted, because they didn't want or couldn't afford any more children. Again, but the vaccine manufacturers have this down as just a label. It's not a human being. It's not an entity in any way, shape, or form, and it's disgusting.
Well, the most important thing for people to realize is, well, not the most important thing, but the children are live. That's the thing when the cells are harvested, and they're not given any anesthetic or anything like that.
Yeah.
It's because it would interfere with the cells once they were harvested. So these
the fresher the better. I'm sorry to be so graphic, Kelly, but the fresher the better. I've heard anecdotal stories.
It's not even fresher the better, because it just can't be. It has to be, cells have to be living to be of any value, to grow cultures on and things. And so a lot of the questions would be, we actually don't know what happens when we inject human DNA from other people from one person into another, say. So we don't know if we're creating an effect in the person it's being injected into. And if we are, then that is transferred down through the next generations, because you've already affected one generation, so it will just transfer down. So
it has to.
Yes. So are we creating a lot more of the autoimmune diseases that we're seeing? Does this contribute to it? And the answer is probably, but again, we're not looking for it. That's what a lot of experts would believe that we are. And certainly autoimmune diseases have risen by 50% in the last 30 years. Now, a genetic increase is 3% over 10 years. So we're doing something that's causing it. And vaccines are probably one of the components, not the only, but probably one of them. And it needs to be looked into. Then we have the other thing about the ingredients is a lot of doctors actually don't know what's in a vaccine. They're given in college the vaccine schedule, how to give it, and the reasons why vaccines are wonderful and what they've done to create, save humanity from a lot of illnesses. Now, that is, it's misconstrued because we don't know that it was vaccines that changed it, in that at the same time, nutrition improved, sanitation improved, clean water improved, living conditions improved. So it's not proven that vaccines saved humanity and got rid of illnesses, because there's illnesses that we don't have vaccines for, which disappeared around the same time when all the other conditions changed.
I'll just make a quick side note, Kelly, sorry to distract you. We've had the flu now for 76 years, or the flu vaccine for 76 years, and we still have the flu. And I know that's a very basic level because it changes season to season and it mutates, I understand. But we seem to be chasing a never-ending path that it just goes from one thing to the next. And if you were to believe or go deeper into your research with Fauci, BRICS, all of that kind of stuff, if they are chimeras in any sort of sense in relation to a virus that's spreading around. But going back to the vaccines, just to clarify the point, and just to make for our viewers, that out of his own words now, I just want to play a short video clip of Bill Gates actually saying that we are sticking DNA into the part. And if you are accessing or imprinting another part of genome or code, it's not a fact that it's having this person. It's if you go off and have a child, and that child, will that child still be human? Because you've altered the DNA. Does that child then become property if it's not human? And does it under law become something completely different going forward? I just want to play that quickly, Kellen. I'll let you answer that.
One final way that's new and is promising is called the RNA vaccine. With RNA and DNA, instead of putting that shape in, you put instructions in the code to make that shape. You put instructions in the code to make that shape.
Everything that I'm about to mention is currently being developed.
I'll leave it there on that video part of the presentation, but he says it himself. Carry on, Kelly, sorry.
So with your regular vaccines, human DNA and animal DNA, they aren't patented. It's not possible to patent human DNA. So with the vaccines up till now, you couldn't patent it, but what you're talking about is the recombinant vaccines with the recombinant RNA and DNA, because it's not, because it is recombinant, it's only parts of it, and they come back when they're in the body, then they recombine, but we don't know how and what they're affecting. Those recombinant vaccines, that they can be patented. So if you put them in, then if they alter, if they were to change DNA and RNA, what you're saying is the same as Monsanto's seeds, basically. Could they change if they're patented, what happens once they're in the body? Yes, but not with the vaccines up till now, just these new ones.
I understand.
So, you know, the other thing about vaccines is they've never been tested in pregnancy, and yet we are saying vaccines should be given to all the pregnant women for flu and pertussis. So they've never actually been tested. They've followed cohorts of pregnant women afterwards to see the effects, but those following studies have many questions. Like, for instance, they eliminate women from that study who have twins or anything like that. They eliminate people who have anything questionable wrong with them beforehand or any health conditions. So it's not true data, basically. It's picked data. So they've never been tested prior to being given to pregnant women. They were never tested on. They've just been followed afterwards. Also, vaccines, no vaccine has ever been tested for its carcinogenic properties or its mutagenic properties. So mutagenic means if it changes the DNA within us. So it's never been tested for those. So it also vaccines are effective. How they are deemed effective is if in the laboratory they can create antibodies. That's it. They're effective. So it's not that people will assume that effective means that it stops you getting an illness. And that's never been tested. They don't give vaccines, let people go out into out and be challenged with the virus and see what happens. They don't sit them in the lab and say, okay, right, we've given you this vaccines for measles, say, and now we're going to expose you to the measles virus and see if you get it. They don't do that. They just see in the lab whether it can produce antibodies in a test tube to that virus. And
saying that as well, Kelly, now the new testing as well, now that the cases are going up exponentially, is because the testing, or the RNR, is only testing for antibodies in the body. And new research coming out now saying that every human being has traces of that antibody. That's paper that's just been made freely available, and I will touch on that in the morning. And it was only a small circumstance of 455 test subjects, but they were in a family orientation. It was the Fat Emperor, Ivor Cummings, released that paperwork. I'm still reading through it myself. But to say the essence is of it, to saying that new information saying that asymptomatic people aren't as big of the spreaders as they are, that the virus is now going through its seasonal change and dying out, hence the reduction in the death rates. But the case rates are going out because the testing of what they're actually searching for is not COVID-19, because they can't accurately prove what COVID-19 is. So they're testing for the antibodies.
Yes. Okay. So you have two tests that they're doing. One is they're testing for antibodies, and one is they're doing a PCR test. So the antibody one, you're right. If you have a coronavirus, it picks up. They can't distinguish, is my understanding, between any coronavirus and SARS-CoV-2. So you're not sure which one you're doing. So my understanding is if you do get that antibody test and they send you off for the PCR test. But there's a lot of issues with the PCR test. It was discovered or invented by Kary Mullis, who got a Nobel Prize for it. But actually, he said that this PCR test was not appropriate to detect viral infection. He actually invented it as a manufacturing technique to replicate DNA and RNA for laboratory work.
Yes.
So it's not a diagnostic tool. And there's no gold standard to test this PCR test against. That would be, the gold standard would be if you had proven through isolation and purification that this virus actually caused the symptoms of COVID-19. But it's, we don't know. We don't know where this RNA's come from, because it's never been isolated. It's never been purified, and it's never been used to reinfect somebody to see if it produces the symptoms of COVID-19. So it has to be determined beforehand to say that this test is finding RNA that causes the COVID-19 symptoms. And because COVID-19 also has no distinctive symptoms, they're very similar to any other virus that can test a cold and thing. It's how do you prove that anybody has it if your test doesn't show it and you have no distinctive symptoms? So you can't. So there's a lot of questions about the testing for it, because it's not conclusive. So even if the test says yes, it doesn't mean the gold standard is not there to say actually we're testing for something that causes COVID-19 symptoms.
And that alone, that statement there alone, Kelly, that you can understand why parents up and down the country are so confused. I've seen a comedian, and I'll use the word loosely, making an example that he was screaming, calling the government, and I won't use his language, but you're calling the F word just because I'm in such polite company. But he's going on blaming the government. You should listen to whatever her name is, the New Zealand Prime Minister, and follow her examples. And blatantly calling for he's clapping on the jailers again, without even looking in that they themselves don't even know what they're trying to find out. They can identify and they can measure, and then they can label it down as a case. They can say it's coronavirus, and then they can increase the amount of cases that they are finding. But yet they're not tying it in or correlating it to the death rate falling off, and that asymptomatic people are not the super spreaders. Because even if you are asymptomatic and you don't carry any symptoms, but you have the antibodies present in your body, then them cases will show either false positive or that you have the antibodies, but not whatever the COVID is in itself. Am I correct?
Yes. So, and the more we test, the more people we're going to find who have a positive test result. So we're just driving the numbers higher. But positive test result does not mean they are sick. as in they may have no symptoms. In fact, a lot of the people who are tested have no symptoms, which we can see because we have very few people in the hospital at the moment, but we have people that they've tested who they're saying are positive. But a lot of those people, they're testing in enclosed environments, like they go into a meat factory or they go into a nursing home and they arbitrarily test everybody there. So you're going to get your positives and things like that. But they have no symptoms. They didn't say, I'm sick, test me. They just went in and looked.
Yeah.
So those people are asymptomatic. And as you said, from the information in that paper, the asymptomatic people, they aren't spreading it, and the World Health Organization even said that. The asymptomatic people, those who asymptomatic being you don't have symptoms. So they aren't spreading it. So, we're just creating bigger numbers. At the beginning of the breakdown, we talked about deaths, X amount of deaths every day or whatever. And then when the deaths dropped, now they're just talking about cases or infection rate. But infection rate is going to get bigger if you're testing. Infection rate is going to get bigger if you open up the community, because that's how a virus works in the wild. It spreads, you get herd immunity, and it's okay. So you are going to have more people once you've opened up the community. But infection rate does not mean it does not mean masses of deaths. And if this virus was as awful as they were saying, everybody would know somebody who had they'd know somebody who died. They'd know somebody who was infected. Everybody would. And the way they're talking about it is like the plague in the middle century, where you just put them outside your door because and just left the
ding ding, bring out your dead. But you can make that comparison with your next slide as well, Kelly, with the TB. I don't know if you're leading on to that.
Yes, exactly. So we have, there's a war mentality. Okay, the government is driving this war mentality. And in a war mentality, you only have two outcomes. You win or you lose. There isn't a possibility to coexist in a war mentality. And the government is using this war mentality to shame people into compliance. So instead of giving evidence and having a debate, they're just shaming people into whatever they want them to do. So if you don't do what they're saying, you're a traitor, basically. And if you look at this next slide, you'll see that actually TB from the World Health Organization itself, this slide here, and you can see at the top where you can get the reference people go. But, in the world, in 2018, that's their latest figures, you can see that 1.5 million people died from TB. 10 million people were infected. So how come there's no war on TB? In fact, we don't even give the tuberculosis vaccine to people here anymore. It's been taken out of the schedule. So we're having far less deaths, as we'll see in the next couple of slides. If you put up the next slide, we'll see what the deaths in Ireland are like. This is all cause mortality in Ireland. So you can see that actually in 2019, we had a very low death rate. In 2020, it's still low. And the red line is your average. If you average those years, that's where the average death rate is for Ireland. And we're not even near it at the moment. So if you travel to the next slide. This slide here shows you the green is your overall deaths for the months of January, February, March, April, May this year in Ireland. The purple is the amount of people who died with COVID-19. Now, I'm saying with because most of those people actually didn't die from it. It didn't actually cause the death. It was a comorbid. They had other illnesses. They died. They had been tested beforehand, and they happened to have it, but they didn't die of it. They could have died of cancer. They could have died of a heart attack. They could have died suicide, anything. But if they had a positive test beforehand, they were listed as having died with COVID-19. It's a little misleading. But you can see that it's nothing like what the World Health Organization is saying the infectious rate of TB is, for instance. So the big concern is, why are we driving this fear here and worldwide for an illness that actually has a greater than 99% recovery rate? We have less than 1% of the people are dying from or with COVID-19. You know, they're just not. And of those deaths, we do have a group that absolutely are more vulnerable to it. And that would be your over 65s who have another condition. It's not just that they have to be over 65, because you have very many healthy people over 65. But if they happen to have another condition, they are more likely. But it's the same likelihood as they would be affected from any influenza or virus that can cause pneumonia, for instance, or anything like that. So actually, 92% of the deaths would be in over 65 with a comorbid factor. And so therefore, we can't actually say 1 in X die with COVID-19, because that's taking in a general population of children and everything. We have to look in the group where most people are dying, which would be the 92% in the 65s and over. And if we do that, and if we look, for instance, at Sweden, who didn't lock down, then the death rates are comparable. We don't look at the general population, we look where the main part of the deaths happened. So if
I
we
just
look,
have that, just have a chart there again. I keep popping it up there as well, because no mandate, no masks, no vaccines, and Sweden was wide open, and that is their death rate per day. And I'll just bring it up towards the, I can't zoom in on it there, but you can see it's just falling off exponentially.
yeah. So, you know, we have all these discrepancies to what the government is saying happening here. And if you look at this slide, you can actually see now where they've mandated masks. So we had in phase 3, we opened on June the 9th. That was when phase 3 reopened. Then they said that on July 15th or whatever date, that you had to have your masks, you had to start wearing masks. But you can actually see that 14 days or 15 days after they mandated masks, that's when they got this spike of infections, not after they put phase 3 into operation. So phase 3 didn't cause that, because they've been totally saying it, everybody's saying it all the way along. You have an incubation period of up to 14 days for this virus. You will develop, if you get it, you're going to develop your symptoms within 14 days. So that spike did not happen after we had phase 3 reopening. That spike happened after we mandated masks. So that leads to the question, why? So if you're wearing a mask and you're rebreathing in your own waste products, because that's what you breathe out, waste products, and you're also breathing in less oxygen and more carbon dioxide, because when you breathe out, you're breathing out, say, 0.04% carbon dioxide. That's what you're breathing in. Sorry, you're breathing in 0.04% carbon dioxide. But when you breathe out, it's 4%, which is 100% increase. So that's floating around and you're trying to rebreathe and things like that. And then they become breeding grounds for,
Yes,
as they get damp and everything, and people are reusing them, because masks are made to be disposable. And if this virus is as dreadful as the government's saying, then all those masks should be put in disposable bins. They shouldn't be reused.
Oh, Kelly, let me just jump across there as well, because I don't even understand why the Green Party aren't even kicking out, because you can see the amount of disposed mass contagious bioweapons that are just scattered across Dublin City or across the country, just discarded. And these are supposed to be the most contagious. We won't go into the mass debate about their efficacy and stuff like that, but I wanted to touch in quickly about the hypercapnia aspect of the mask wearing as well. That's part of the side effect of that is to raise your temperature, because your immune system, your oxygen uptake is depressed, but you can elevate your temperature. So this breathing then, even by wearing the mask, can obviously put you up for suspicion of COVID, because you have a high temperature, because you're wearing a mask all day. You're denied access to shops, denied access to flights, and if you were in New Zealand, you're going to be swept off the streets and carried away. But meanwhile, that dancing clown that was going, oh, fucking government, you're not even questioning the science that they use, and they can deprive you of your civil liberties, your body autonomy, under medical tyranny.
Yes, and I would also say that we need to start asking questions. Parents especially need to ask their schools, for instance, what is their policy? When they send their children back to school, when they reopen, what is the school's policy? Because the government has actually said that if a child displays any symptoms, which we talked about, there's no specific distinctive symptom for this. So if they display any cold sort of symptom and the school decides they may have COVID-19, then that child will be isolated. The school will try and contact the parents, and this child will be tested. And so you need to ask the school, is that what they're going to do? Are they going to do that? And what happens if they do test the child? Are they going to then, what are they going to do? Are they going to just keep them there till you arrive, or are they going to take them to hospital, or what? So parents need to ask that question. They also need to inform themselves about what the test is, because it's not the antibody test, it's the swab. And the swabbing test that they use here is not just inside the nose. They're going right back up into the back here, into the nasal pharynx, and that's sort of near the brain area and things. So they need to ask what the test is.
That material that's taken away, Kelly, as well. I mean, I know it's at the back of the throat, but that contains DNA as well. Am I right?
Well, it would contain cells, yes. So it would have some information in it, yes.
But who's controlling that information? As you said,
so
I understand. But what about the nose one? Surely the swab at the back of the nose goes straight to
they're taking both. They're going right back up here, and they're taking in a swab at the throat. So it's a very invasive test.
It is. It's very uncomfortable.
Well, I've never had it, but it is a very invasive test. But the other thing is that we actually produce another test. There's a company here in Ireland who has produced a less invasive test, but the government won't use it for some reason. We'd have to ask them why. But
guaranteed ours? Is it guaranteed ours?
Yes. And other people other countries are using it, but we're not. So I have no idea why we're not supporting an Irish company.
The land of saints and scholars. Go ahead, Kelly, sorry.
Okay. So what I would really love to see is open debate. The government isn't engaging in that. The government is refusing to engage in an open debate about their policies and the science that they say they're basing it on. That's not right. They need to engage, and they need to tell people, and they need to treat people's concerns respectfully and not just say, oh, that's not valid, because they haven't proved anything. So the question is why? Why won't the government engage with the legitimate concerns of people and over the measures that they're implementing? You know, there's no engagement over the masks, and there's no change in the evidence as far as I can see, and from when the World Health Organization and our people here said, no, we don't need to wear masks, not at all, they don't do anything. And then also one of the advisors that they're using in the government, Carl Hennigan, actually said they're not doing anything. They're not stopping the spread. And as we saw from the last slide, that actually after we said you have to wear masks in shops, that's when the spike happened. So, and it would also seem that most of the countries who are having huge spikes and huge second spikes, and even the states in the United States, the specific states who are having them, seem to be the ones that have put in the most draconian measures.
Yes.
So that's a question we need answered. Why is that happening with the ones who are actually putting in the most draconian measures, who are saying this is for people's safety? Why the spikes are happening mostly in those places? We also need to know from the government why we're not using hydroxychloroquine. We've heard from various pharmacists that actually if somebody came and presented a prescription for hydroxychloroquine to a pharmacist, the pharmacist would then actually, beforehand, they would just have filled the prescription. Now they will ring, they've been told they need to ring the doctors and ask them why they've given this prescription. Now, why? If it's been shown. Yeah, it's been shown that if you give hydroxychloroquine with zinc and also with an antibiotic, specific antibiotic at the very beginning, at the very beginning of the symptoms,
yes,
it can stop it. So we have an effective cure if you give it at the beginning. There is one study that people start quoting and say, oh, it isn't effective. But that study did not give it at the beginning of infection. That gave it at end stage when people were literally dead anyway.
Or the correct dosage or the correct combination. They gave hydroxychloroquine on its own.
Well, they also gave lethal doses, basically.
Yeah, lethal doses. Overdid it. But I would say, I knew we did say we weren't going to get political, but Orange Man bad, hence hydroxychloroquine bad. You know, people automatically dismiss it because the big Orange Man bad. So I'm not going over that neck of the woods, but because we've been screaming it from the rooftops here as well, and following all the studies, even the Lancet one that got dismissed, and more peer-reviewed studies coming out, and the proven effects of it. Simeon Golden, that American doctor, and the American doctors that came out in the steps of Washington and have been scorched from all social media platforms, that information withdrawn, advocating for it as well. So we can't say, we understand you've got this vaccine on time warp speed, you're willing to rush it out, but we have this 60-year-old malarial drug that we understand through Judy Merkovitz, through various other virologists, that way back when they were doing SARS-CoV-2 or the HIV, they understood that hydroxychloroquine was a very strong component of that, and it could effectively wipe it out. Again, it's been on the shelves for what, 55, 60 years. We've got medical practitioners all around the world saying they've had no adverse effects with it, of people with underlying conditions, but they've been able to monitor it. Why shouldn't it be given out under medical supervision by their own doctors? And when clearly, if it was given into the nursing homes, partly with people of an early age that could succumb to it, be given this information, even now, when we understand. No
and
question.
It's also been used as a prophylactic in many cases as well. There are many.
Orange Man Bad did it. He took it for 3 weeks. No effects.
Well, there were actually, I would probably think he's taken it for a lot longer, but so have many other government officials. In fact, worldwide, there are some government officials who said that they were all told to take it.
I'll tell you, you just reminded me specifically, Uganda. The Uganda president, most of his population have been on it. They've had one of the smallest outbreaks of COVID. Most of the people take it as a course, as daily routine for mosquito bites and to prevent malaria because they live in Uganda. The Uganda president sent off an apple of fruit and a goat to the testing procedures. They came back positive. So that was your first inclusion. But that population of Uganda have a very minuscule effect of COVID-19 because the whole population regularly takes hydroxychloroquine.
Yeah, so we have many questions for the government. And one of the questions also that we need to ask is, they're talking about a vaccine like it's the panacea for all this. Yeah. Well, it's not, because it's never been proven. They're rushing it to market, like you said earlier. They're skipping safety, the small amount of safety that we have, because what the people need to realize is some vaccines, their safety study only goes on for days. It doesn't follow the cohort for a long time. Some of them are as small as 4 days. Some are just a couple of weeks. So and then we have the new technology, because a lot of them are recombinant DNA and RNA. And the other thing is that every time prior to this that they've ever tried to make a coronavirus vaccine, they've run into trouble. And what has happened is, in the animal tests, because they did animal tests previously with the other coronavirus vaccines, and what happened is it created an effect where they did produce antibodies and everybody was delighted, but when they were challenged with the wild virus, their immune system had a heightened response, and it was so heightened that all the animals actually died. So they stopped trying. So we have big concerns about what they're doing now with this one and where it's going.
I have one final question as well. You might be able to answer for me as well, Kelly. And again, before we round off, we're coming up to the end of the show here now. We're probably down to the last 5 minutes, and I want to thank you for such a valued information. I'll tell you, thank you also again for your courage in coming forward and speaking out. I don't know if it's going to have, as the good teacher that I had on last night, she lost her job over a throwaway comment on social media, but it sort of blew up and it cost her job. And I wish her well, and I hope the same. Your own circumstances completely different that going forward, that it won't affect you speaking out. But my last and final question is, because of my understanding now, because of the rollout, because I've had the information of the government's letter to the teachers, they're now having their conversations and they're having their meetings for to follow the regulations as they bring the children back in for their psychological conditioning, because it's the only way I can describe it. And I don't mean to be flippant about it, because it's very real for a lot of people that are a lot confused. But part of the first round of vaccinations that the government have said that the vaccine between the ages of 2 to 12 years of age will be a live virus, and that those older and above will take attenuated version of that virus. What is the difference between the live virus and the attenuated version? And what is the live virus that they're supposedly going to be given to the children, if you can answer it?
I don't, it would depend on, to answer the question, you'd actually have to see what was in the vaccine. Now, your live virus is what it says. It's just the virus taken in. Attenuated means that it's a part of the virus that's been added to the vaccine. However, which is the recombinant one? Probably the attenuated. It would be the recombinant vaccine. So you then have questions about both types of vaccines. And just to say that there are doctors who are speaking out, and people could go look them up. I mean, there's a group of 500 doctors also come out in Germany called ACU, and because the parliament in Germany and parliaments worldwide are not asking these questions or answering the questions that their populations have, they've convened a COVID-19 extra parliamentary inquiry, and they're going to investigate the restrictive measures that have been imposed and the proportionality of the restrictions. So they're medical, social affairs, law, economics, from all walks of those lives. And here in Ireland, we have Dr. Marcus de Bruin, who wrote a paper called COVID-19 Mismanagement in Ireland. And people can follow him on Twitter, and it's important people start looking up for their own information. I don't want anybody to just take at face value what I've said. I want them to go and research their own stuff and then make an informed choice for themselves about the measures that we're doing now, vaccines, the one that's coming in, and also other ones. And I'd like them never to take anything at face value, just to research everything and ask their own questions. That would be what I would encourage people to do. And then, what it appears now is that everything we are doing, or the government is doing here and in other places, is all about controlling the population. So they're training the population to only do that which they've permitted to do. And so no beaches, no kissing, no hugging, no dancing. Children are not allowed to be children. And actually what they're doing is deconstructing the family structure and society. They're just breaking it down. So that's really concerning. And people need to start asking the questions about why we're doing this.
We should follow that up on another conversation as well, Kelly, because I'm sure you're a veritable wealth of information. Kelly, I want to thank you very much, because I'm going to round it off now, I think, at a very succinct time, so that people might tune in if we get in under an hour. But you've deluged us there with a wealth of information, and you've opened up a platform for more questioning. Before I let you go quickly, where can people find you, and will you direct them towards the Health Freedom Ireland website?
Healthfreedomireland.com is the website for Health Freedom Ireland, and I'm just kellycsjohnson.com is my website. So,
and they can find your book there, links to your book over on Amazon as well, yes?
They can, and also then I'm on Twitter as the same, kellycsjohnson.com, and Health Freedom Ireland is Health Freedom Ireland IE. So
fantastic, Kelly.
.com, just Kelly C.S. Johnson on Twitter. So they can find me.
That's brilliant. We're getting very awfully close, Kelly. I'm going to let you go there and say thank you very much for coming on. Thank you for being a great guest. And thank you for absolutely my pleasure. Kelly, ladies and gentlemen, virtual round of applause, please, while I let Kelly go there. Kelly, take care. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Okay, live chat. We've got 2 minutes. No roll call for tonight, but we will back in with you first thing in the morning. Again, I encourage you to do your own research, as Kelly has said. Don't take our word for it. Don't take Kelly's word for it. Go and investigate what Kelly has outlined there for each and every one of us. More questions that need to be answered, but we need the journalists, the supposed journalists, because journalism in Ireland is in crisis. I've said it time and time again. I'm a news person. I'm not a journalist. I'm just asking questions, and you're here with me, and we're all asking questions. Live chat, you've been fantastic. I would see you again back here first thing in the morning, 0900 Greenwich Mean Time, and we'll carry on our usual disquisition, and we'll carry on our usual conversations with each other, and we'll see if we can get to the bottom of this but we will keep in contact with each other and offer each other hope and spread the message that questions need to be asked, and the Irish people must begin to rise up. Live chat, take it easy. Us.